And then one day, seemingly out of the blue, I was diagnosed. That's a very scary word we hear so much of these days. I was diagnosed with cancer. And I knew too much by then to hide from myself any longer. I knew that cancer was a disease of resentment that literally is held for a very long time till it eats away at the body. You see, when we stuff things down inside of us, it has to go somewhere. And if we spend a lifetime of stuffing things down, it's going to manifest at some point somewhere. And of course, I became very aware then what the resentment within me could be about. I had been a very badly physically and sexually abused child. And of course I'd have resentment. Of course I would be bitter and unforgiving. Why wouldn't I? I had never, ever done any work to change it or to release it or to let it go. When I left home, it was all I could do to just no longer think of that stuff and try to put it behind me. And when I found my spiritual pathway, I covered my feelings up, or whatever was down there, I covered with a nice layer of spirituality. And I put such a wall around myself that I literally was totally out of touch with my own feelings. I didn't know who I was or where I was. But after my diagnosis, my inner work of beginning to get to know myself really began at that point. Thank God I had tools to work with, because I know what the panic is when you're first diagnosed and you don't know what to do. But I had guidance and I had tools to work with, and I knew that I needed to go within me if I was going to make any permanent changes. Yes, the doctor could give me an operation and perhaps take care of that for the moment. But if I didn't change what was going on inside of me, if I didn't change the way I was using my thoughts and my words, I'd probably recreate it again. So no longer was I content to get green lights in the parking places. I knew that I had to go much, much deeper. And I realized that I was not really progressing in my life the way I wanted to, because I hadn't really cleared out this old garbage from childhood. And I wasn't living with what I was teaching. My inner child really needed help, because my inner child was in great pain, and I needed to recognize that and work with her. But thank God I had these tools to work with, and I knew what to do. And I began a program of self-healing in earnest. One of the first things I remember I did was to began studying and reading everything I could about alternative ways to heal cancer, because I truly believed it could be done. And yes, I did a nutritional cleansing program, which was very good for my body. I did affirmations, I did treatments, I did visualizations, I worked in every way that I could. And I also went to a good therapist who was skilled in helping people express and release their angers. And I spent a whole period of beating pillows and kicking and screaming, and it was wonderful. It felt so good, because I'd never, ever, ever had permission to do that in my life. And we also worked on understanding and on forgiveness. You know, no matter what avenue of spirituality you follow, you will find always that forgiveness is an enormous issue at any time, but most particularly when there's an illness. Even the Course in Miracles says that all dis-ease comes from a state of non-forgiveness. And when we are ill, we need to look around and see who it is we need to forgive. And it's usually that very person that we think we will never forgive. But of course, not forgiving someone else doesn't harm them in the slightest, but it plays havoc with us. It plays havoc with us, because the issues aren't theirs, the issues are ours. So one of the things I did was I explored my parents' childhood as much as I could. And I began to understand where they were coming from. And I realized that where they were coming from and how they'd been brought up, they couldn't really have done anything differently than what they did. They were brought up in abuse, and they continued to abuse. And nobody taught them another way to go. It was their way of life. But my growing understanding enabled me to start the forgiveness process. You know, if you're walking down the street and somebody bumps into you and you whip around, you're very angry, how dare they do that? And then you see that the person is blind. The understanding that you have instantly dissolves that anger. And I think that when we can really begin to understand the childhood of the people who have done us wrong, it enables us to go almost beyond forgiveness and into understanding, so that we can open the doors to our own heart. You see, people who have problems loving themselves are always people who are not willing to forgive, because non-forgiveness shuts that door. And when you forgive and when you let go, not only does a huge weight drop off your shoulders, but the doorway to your own self-love opens up. You know, people will say, oh, such a load has dropped off. Well, of course, because you've been carrying this burden forever. Now, I'm not saying that we're condoning poor behavior, because we're not. We don't want to be in bondage ourselves to something that perhaps happened a long, long time ago. As my forgiveness of them grew, so did my willingness to forgive myself. Forgiveness of ourselves is enormously important. See, many of us grow up and we begin hating our inner child for having had those experiences. And we do the same things to our inner child that they did to us. We just continue it. And that's very sad, because when we were children and other people may have been mistreating us, we didn't have options. But when we grow up and we are mistreating our own inner child, that's very sad and very, very tragic. And as I forgave myself, I began to trust myself to take care of me. When we don't trust life, or when we don't trust other people, it's really because we don't trust ourselves. We don't trust ourselves to take care of ourselves in a situation. So we say, I'll never fall in love again because I don't want to get hurt, or I will never let this happen. But what we're really saying is, I don't trust you enough to take good care of me, so I'm going to stay away from everything. But I began to trust myself enough to take care of me. And I found it easier and easier to love myself. And my body was healing, and most of all, my heart was healing. Most of all, my heart was healing.